I think I understand now why Hamas accepted this ceasefire. Initially, I feel like to anyone looking at it from a surface level, it seems like a suicide deal, right? They're giving up their only leverage. They're just going to dissolve into thin air. They must have been super militarily beaten down in this war of attrition to just like give up like that. But it's totally different than that. And Trump's Knesset speech reveals this. I'm going to play a clip from Anna Kasparian on Piers Morgan in a second because she has some decent thoughts on how this is going to turn out. But it has become politically infeasible for Netanyahu to remilitarize in Gaza now. That is the dynamic I did not realize. Here's a quote from the Knesset speech in which Donald Trump kind of calls Netanyahu a murderer, right? This is interesting. Look at this quote. He's referencing one of his conversations with Netanyahu. He said, I said, Bibi, you're going to be remembered for this far more than if you keep this thing going and kill, kill, kill. Right? Trump does not want this Gaza war on his name any longer. And he has put 200 United States troops in Gaza to ensure that Netanyahu does not go in and enforce phases 2 and 3 of this ceasefire or 20-point peace plan on the IDF's terms. So I think that's what Hamas is banking on. And to be fair, it's their only choice, right? They have been beaten down significantly. But Netanyahu has been talking on Israeli television. A lot of other members of the government have been saying the military operation isn't over, right, etc. That kind of phrasing. But the reason that they don't say that to the Americans is because they know Trump won't accept it. And Trump probably hasn't been aware of the internal Israeli dialogue. But we know Netanyahu has changed for Trump. He has accepted terms that he would have never accepted in the beginning of 2025. He wanted to continue this war to completion, occupy all of Gaza, and do it his way, right? And then transfer it over to whatever, or even settle it, right? At least Trump has been a force in the opposite direction there. I'll talk more about this after we play this Anna Kasparian clip. She has some decent thoughts, but slightly wrong in some areas. But she's like calmed down a little bit since the war ended, right? She was getting kind of crazy by the end, just like saying unhinged things. But here is the clip.
Overall, the feeling today was extremely joyous and I would argue hopeful. What's your thought?
Cautious, very cautious optimism, especially given some of the statements that we've heard from the Israelis over the weekend. Benjamin Netanyahu gave a speech to the Americans that made it appear as though he believed in the ceasefire and was going to follow through with it. Remember, they've only agreed to the first stage of the ceasefire, and the rest of it is still incredibly murky. But then on Israeli television, he spoke in Hebrew and talked about how the military operation isn't over yet. Then you have Israel Katz talking about how as soon as we secure the release of all the hostages, we're going to go back in and destroy the tunnels. So there are some signs that make me a little uneasy. But I will say this. I was happy to see the hostages released. The videos of them reunited with their family members are incredibly moving. The innocent Palestinians you're referring to, though, are going home to raised communities, raised neighborhoods. They have no home to go back to. So I'm concerned about them and their well-being. That being said, it does appear that there's some humanitarian aid being allowed into the Gaza Strip. It remains to be seen if it's enough in order to help people who have been intentionally starved for months.
That is absolutely true. And we can talk about implications of this. And the possible insinuation of, talks of Palestinian statehood. Like, Trump has become drunk on this idea of getting the Nobel Peace Prize, and he knows the only way it's going to happen is if he gets a two-state solution, but that's also politically infeasible for him. I think we should look at the phases of this ceasefire, because while Netanyahu has endorsed the 20-point plan, he has not officially, run it through the processes of accepting it, as they did for phase 1. Both sides already agreed to phase 1. Phase 1 was basically prisoners for hostages. It was like 100 to 1. No. It was 100 to 1, basically. Hostage prisoner swap, right? Life sentence, 250 life sentence prisoners, and then 1,700 prisoners who were detained after October 7th, probably for reasons that are suspect, right? But here are the phases of the ceasefire, just so you know. So we have phase 1, which I already went over. It's basically the prisoner exchange. And from that, they actually withdraw to an intermediary line. It's called the yellow line, It's kind of halfway between their previous occupation lines and the full perimeter of Gaza. And then there's phase 2 and 3, which no side has agreed to. It's the most important part, and Anna points that out quite well, that the whole part about, Hamas demilitarizing, leaving Gaza amnesty, but Netanyahu has said, as I said, in principle, he agrees with the whole plan. None of this has been negotiated. And as I said, all of this is going to be negotiated under the pretense of Donald Trump willing to do anything, probably, to stop further offenses in Gaza. So just to go over what 2 and 3 are. Phase 2, the proposed strategy includes the destruction of Hamas's offensive weaponry, tunnels military infrastructure, make them incapable of further violence. Gaza will be a de-radicalized terror-free zone that does not pose a threat to its neighbors. It will offer amnesty to Hamas members who commit to peaceful coexistence with safe passage provided for those who opting for exile. Additionally, a temporary international stabilization force comprised of U.S., Arab, and European personnel will be overseeing the training of a Palestinian police force, right? And this goes into phase 3. This is all very interesting because Trump very heavily insinuates a Palestinian state. In phase 3, he says, a transitional administration led by Palestinian technocrats. So if you have a government that is comprised of Palestinians, leading Palestinians, and they have a border, right? Isn't that kind of a transition to a Palestinian state? But so many people, like Ben Shapiro, Mike Waltz, etc., the other guy, what's his name? Mike Huckabee? Yeah, I blanked on that. They are very much against the Palestinian state, so I'm surprised that they are holding this up. And many right-wingers in Israel did not even show up to Trump's speech in the Knesset here because of this stuff in phase 2 and 3 that Netanyahu has been pressured, credit to Trump, into agreeing to. Like, he would never even touch this stuff with a 10-foot pole. Certainly, if Biden had negotiated this, Ben Shapiro would be flipping out. Like, this is just like too liberal for that, right? So all the stuff that matters, right? The only thing that's been agreed to is the prisoner swap. The 20-to-1 prisoner swap. Everything else is up for grabs, and I think it's very likely that Hamas is going to, appeal to the fact that this ceasefire has to be maintained. There has to be more compromise than just Hamas leave Gaza, Israel withdraw to the red line, and then to the black line, which is a perimeter around the inside of Gaza. I believe 1 kilometer of buffer zone, right? They're probably going to demand more because this does give them temporary leverage that they didn't have. You wouldn't think they have with no hostages. They do have leverage because they have the power to restart military conflict. If you think about it, they have the power to scuttle these negotiations, to which they are one half of the equation. So if you think about it like that, it actually makes a lot of sense. And maybe Anna's a little bit more or less hopeful than I am that the conflict will end. She thinks Netanyahu could defy Trump. I don't think that. I think Netanyahu's fallen far enough towards Trump. Trump has gone there, lobbying for his pardonship from like his possible corruption case. I think he's falling towards Trump in a way that will make this impossible, regardless of what he says. Vague statements of like Israel's military operation is still ongoing. He mostly, like Anna said, that he mostly says that stuff in regards to like the Iran axis, the general enemies of Israel. He didn't say the Gaza conflict in specific because he has stood like steadfast by the ceasefire, because he really has no choice. Anyone saying he does have a choice, show him the 200 United States troops on the ground. I mean, I'm just trying to compile the information to make a good prediction here. And I don't see this conflict restarting. And I know a lot of pro-Palestinians are just going to be itching to predict that it's just going to blow up like tomorrow. I just don't think that's the case. But if you look at phases 2 and 3, this is very interesting how this will turn out. It looks like the only way forward without restarting the conflict is to give the pretenses for Palestinian statehood negotiations which are futile, completely futile given the previous Knesset rulings on the status of the West Bank and basically cutting the West Bank in half by annexing a very specific region of the West Bank. But that's the only way forward I can think. Maybe like an individual enclave in Gaza with some kind of semi-sovereignty, but then that's like how Hamas got elected. But then again, the Palestinian people, part of why Hamas probably accepted this is the Palestinian people in Gaza went from 70% acceptance rate of October 7th to a 30%. They did not think it was worth it because they had to suffer from it, right? So they would, I doubt that they would elect a Hamas-like figure. I think the Gazans are less. They're definitely less radical than Palestinians in the West Bank. They would be happy with the Clinton parameters type deal, but that seems to be off the table. So I don't see any way forward here. I don't see the Palestinian statehood way as feasible. I also don't think the restarting of the conflict necessarily as feasible right now, unless Donald Trump turns and his dialogue about Netanyahu being a murderer is meaningless because he would not want this to restart, right? Fox News has already pumped out 20 clips of how Trump is like the peace president and is like Nobel Peace Prize worthy, even though he's bombing random boats in the Caribbean, but whatever.